As a graduating senior, I've been thinking a lot about beginnings and ends. Actually, I've been thinking more and more about beginnings as my time in college is coming to an end. And among all the memories I've made, there's this one time in my freshman year that I remember the most and which I'd like to share with you today. It was about a month into the second semester of my first year. The excitement and enthusiasm for the new year quickly drained out as I reached campus for my second time. The roads, the buildings, and the rooms, everything was familiar, but for some reason, the whole place didn't feel as welcoming as it had been before. I slowly felt I was out of place, or that I had lost my place, and this was like a weight pressing down on me that I had to figure out how to relieve. On this one night, I was awake and on the phone. It was about 4 a.m, and my roommates were fast asleep in their beds on our room on the second floor. And instead of being in bed like them, I was in the basement of our first-year hall. In the basement, there was a laundry room where I happened to be. And the laundry room wasn't the most hospitable place in the building, but it was enough for me to have a private phone conversation without waking up any of my roommates. So there I was, sitting on the laundry room floor. I'd forced myself to be awake just to be in the same time zone as my friends in Korea. I would talk to them for a couple hours at a time, and this was the thing that I looked forward to most during my days. I was constantly craving something that would help my out-of-placeness, something familiar, and something comforting. And at that time, the act of talking to my friends and speaking in Korean was the only thing that I could make myself comfortable. And this was a little animation I made at that time that illustrates how I felt when I was on the phone. When I was talking to my friends, it was like my surroundings would melt around me, along with my worries and anxiety. It was warm and bubbly, and it was the closest I could get to home. Now, I continued to make these calls for a while, and it didn't take long for me to adjust my internal clock to my friends in Korea. So I was living by a completely different time to where I was in Ohio. And this wasn't the best lifestyle to have as a college student. Not only was I sleep deprived, but I was slowly slipping away from my Ohio life entirely. I disengaged myself from the things that were happening around me, including things that were happening in school, and also distanced myself from the friends that I had made on campus. My little routine wasn't helping me in the big picture. And although I did enjoy the phone calls thoroughly, they weren't helping me solve my problem. I was homesick. To me, homesickness comes in different forms. When I was little, it was what I sometimes felt when I was away at summer camp or on sleepovers. It was missing my mom and dad, or missing sleeping in my bed with my stuffed animals. And later, when I came to college in America, homesickness was what I felt when I went for a long time without Korean food, or when I missed out on holidays and family events while being abroad. But during this time, my freshman year, I couldn't quite place the finger on what I was homesick for. I wasn't actually missing Korea, even though I was constantly calling people in Korea to talk to them in Korean. I wasn't sure if I was missing anywhere in the world. And this was the first encounter of the question that brings me here today. What is home? To me, the idea of home exists in two separate parts. The first, home means something externally. And the second, home means something internally. The first, the external home, is a place, somewhere that we can pinpoint the location of. This home could be the city that you were born in, the neighborhood you were raised in, the house your parents lived in, or even your dorm room. Home, in the external sense, is a country, a city, a house, or a room. But it isn't just that. Home doesn't have to be where you live or have lived. Instead, it's where you spend your time. So it can be a particular beach, a street, a studio or office, or even an academic building. On the other hand, the internal home doesn't have any physicality. Instead, it's a psychological place. The internal home is the sense of home, or the feeling of being at home. And if I were to ask every one of you in this room today, what makes you feel most at home? I'd probably get a different answer from every single person. One might say that they feel most at home when they're relaxing after a long day, watching television, or taking a warm shower. And to another person, home might be at the dinner table when they share a meal with their family. The internal home is where we gain our sense of belonging and rootedness. It doesn't lie in any sort of physical structure, but it lies in a memory. It lies in a favorite activity, or even a certain dish of food. It lies in friends and family members and lovers and many more other things than this. The internal home makes us feel that we can loosen up and let our guards down and be vulnerable because we trust it to protect us. And this internal home is where we go to restore and liberate ourselves. Now, obviously, the internal and the external don't exist separately. After all, if somebody thinks a particular beach is their home, it's because of all the summers they spent there. And similarly, the summers became memories of home because of the beach being where it is. So a physical home without emotional presence can't be more than a structure. And the sense of home without any sort of physicality will remain as a longing. The happy marriage between the internal and the external is what I understand to be home. And my next question was naturally, where is my home? And this was an even harder question for me to answer. I always recognized myself as being somewhat nomadic, and not nomadic meaning that I'm free-spirited or adventurous, but I just happened to move around a lot when I was growing up. My parents and I moved in and around South Korea and America, and while I was growing up, I went to 5 different elementary schools, enrolling into a different school almost every year. As a shy girl who was always in her own little world, moving around and being the new kid all the time wasn't easy for me. So later, I chose to go to boarding school, where I spent the next 6 years of my school life. For the past 10 years, I've been living in dorms, 6 years in boarding school, and 4 years here at Denison University. In terms of physical places, I've had more than 20 homes, but I can't even remember all of them. And I certainly don't have one place that I can say I'm from. And having no home, or not being able to identify where I come from, at least on a map in the physical world, was a troubling thought to me. And I thought this was the reason why I was homesick. But I soon realized that my home isn't a fixed structure. It's constantly changing. When I was a kid and growing up, my home was my parents, it was my family. And when I was in school, it was the friends I made and the dormitory that we spent our time in. And even though I moved around, changing external homes from time to time, the people I knew never left me, so I never had to leave home either. Things changed when I came to America by myself. I was homesick, and I wasn't homesick for Korea, and I wasn't homesick for my parents' house or even my boarding school. I was homesick for the long walks I had with my parents after dinner. I was homesick for the afternoons I spent with my friends in our common room. And this was just the means of finding new things to occupy my inner space. And it wasn't the late night phone calls made in the laundry room that did that. It was the new people, the new discoveries, and the new experiences I had that made me feel like I was where I wanted to be, but this time in Ohio. So, where does all this talk of home bring us? At least to me, it brings me right here where I'm standing. And it brings me to my graduation and the questions that are asked about what's going to be next. And maybe it'll speak to me even further in the future whenever I don't know where I belong. And maybe it'll speak to you when you don't know where you'll be next. However, I believe that if we carry our inner homes around with us and unpack it wherever we go, home will always be where we are. Because home isn't just what surrounds us, it's what's within us. Thank you.